Hey everybody, welcome to We've Got Worm, a Daily Planet Films podcast series where we expertly dissect and discuss the hit web serial Worm week by week, arc by arc. My name is Matt Freeman, your host, and dude who secretly bought a cauldron vial to gain enhanced podcasting powers. And I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Scott, and unfortunate Case 53. How's it going today, Scott?
It's going pretty good, Matt. I guess I didn't get any cool podcasting powers.
I mean, you may have, but they're hard to notice under all of the growths.
The monstrosity. Yeah. I mean, let's just say I'm made for radio.
Yeah.
All right. As you said, this is the podcast where you, a worm expert, guide me, a first-time reader, through Wild Bill's world of superheroes, supervillains, and everything in between as I inspect, interpret, and even speculate on what the story is and where it is going. This week, we're tackling Part 2 of Arc 15 Colony, which covers chapters 15.6 all the way through the end of the arc. We got this pretty heavily hinted at in Arc 1, Matt, and the first part of the arc, Matt, but these chapters kind of confirm that Arc 15 is all about family, about the family you have, the family you choose, and the conflict and complications that arise from those relationships.
Yeah, we get some very impactful interludes here, a lot of them having to do with that exact theme. I'm excited to get to these. We had some great interludes last week, and there are more to be found here. Some of my favorite parts of the story, actually.
Yeah, there's 10 chapters in this, and then 4 interludes, so almost a fourth of this total arc is interludes. And you're right, they're all really good ones. They're really impactful. I think we spent the most time in last week's podcast about the Carol and the Brian interludes, and I think we're probably going to do the same here with these two, at least one of them for sure. So there's definitely a lot. And the important part is, I think, we talk about these interludes and we talk about how they're focusing on different characters, but the thing that always amazes me is how, even when they don't feature Taylor at all, they tie back to the themes and the events in her stories in a very natural and organic way. And it doesn't feel forced. It's presenting to you, it's telling you this kind of mini story almost, but this is important not just to the background of what's happening to the character, but to the type of things that the character is going through. And I think that's very commendable that Wild Bill manages to do that.
Yeah, you could almost call some of these interludes like a narrative counterpoint, where it's emphasizing either by comparison or by contrast some particular aspect of Taylor's journey. Yeah,
absolutely. So with that, why don't we just jump right into it?
Yeah, we're going to skip over the comments and questions again because we're time traveling.
Yeah.
So yeah, here we go. Opening on 15.6. And as we left off last time, Fletchette has Skitter pinned and her superpowered blade to Skitter's throat. She's being extremely suspicious of Skitter because she and presumably the heroes in general believe that Skitter and Tattletale had something to do with what happened with Panacea, because they don't know any better. Unfortunately, Tattletale's habit of ruining everyone's lives has backfired on us.
Yeah, I like this touch a lot. I think it's good to remind us how little is actually known about Tattletale's power. And I think if you track this through the book so far, every time we have characters interact with Tattletale, they come away knowing a little bit more about her power. And we see that they're getting closer and closer to actually discovering what she does on some level. And I think that's a really cool thread to follow through the story. Yeah,
that's interesting. That kind of marks out for me the fact that I feel like prior to the S9 arc, the Protectorate and the Wards sort of saw the Undersiders as that teenage supervillain gang, and by the end of this arc they have a very different perspective on the Undersiders.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we finished this arc with them having an argument about whether we need to take these people out. Right. And we get told several times that with the 9 gone, they're priority 1 now, which is kind of crazy. These teenagers running around, not really knowing what they're doing and stumbling almost into power. It is incredible. The other thing I really like about this moment, though, is we're seeing once again that Taylor's general reputation in the entire Cape world is of someone who is extremely untrustworthy. We saw this again. We saw this in the last section at the beginning of Arc 15, and we see it again here. And it's something that Taylor doesn't see in herself at all and gets really frustrated at, and like wonders why don't all you people believe that I'm telling you the truth about stuff. And they replies basically, well, because of all those other times you lied to everyone. And she's just like, okay, yeah, but besides those, like, I'm honest. And it's just really funny to watch this interaction.
Yeah, I only lied for the greater good, but this time I'm telling the truth because
honest.
Trust me. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and it's something that, like, you can see, especially in this section, like, how frustrated she is. She's like, I don't understand. Like, I tell these people the truth. I'm being totally honest with them, and they don't believe me. It's like, yeah, well, that's because your actions have consequences, and you lied to people before. So, like, why should they believe you in this moment?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, on with Flechette being wrong about things, but for good reasons. She also assumes the best about Armsmaster, and she seems completely unaware that he was basically under house arrest. So it seems like the cover story worked pretty well if even another Protectorate member believed that story.
Yeah, this is a really interesting, like, window into how information is fed to you when you work for the government, and how you are basically completely reliant on your central authority figure to feed you information, and you tend to believe that information because it's kind of the only thing you're getting, because you see it as the morally just authority figure, so why would they lie to me? I think this is a really nice reflection on the end of Arc 14, where we saw Legend learn the truth of Cauldron, a group that he basically was getting all his information from and assumed that they were being straight and honest with him. So we're seeing these people learning about these organizations that are not being truthful.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So Skitter gets a little bit sidetracked at this point, arguing with Flechette about exactly that, about the profound moral corruption of the Protectorate as she sees it, in contrast to Flechette's more naive take on it. She tells Flechette about Armsmaster's plan to sacrifice villain capes in order to set up Leviathan, which she really wasn't supposed to tell people about. Skitter is not really good at keeping secrets, Scott.
No, not at all. She really only seems to keep secrets until the point where she needs to use that secret in one of her plans. I think this ties really well to her general lack of concern about the consequences of her actions, and what happens to those, specifically to her and those around her when she does stuff like this. She makes these decisions kind of unilaterally and doesn't seem to worry about what they could do to everyone else. And I like that she seems to realize that she shouldn't reveal the secret. Like, I think she even says it out loud to Flechette, like, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but then does it anyway. So again, moralization and justification. She thinks it's the right thing to do, so she's going to do it.
Yeah, it was like a pretty crucial deal that she'd made with the Protectorate not to talk about that.
Yeah, so. I mean, this is definitely not something minor.
Yeah. So eventually Skitter gets around to offering Parian the money and resources she needs to really take care of her people and get them surgery, get them all fixed up from what Bonesaw did. She offers to show Parian her territory so she can see what she's doing with it.
Yeah, and I think Taylor's pretty smart here. She appeals to the exact thing that she knows that Parian would want the most. So she's kind of using her toolbox to identify the best way to squeeze on her and executing it pretty flawlessly. I think it's important to note that in this opening chapter, I call it opening chapter. It's not really, we're halfway through the arc, but bear with me here. Taylor's making this logical plea that's legitimately intended to help protect people. Ballistic is storming around destroying things. He's gonna hurt Parian if he finds her. She wants to genuinely help Parian out. She feels bad for her. And I think it's important in this moment that we are reminded of that essential good side of Taylor. Because when we're reminded of these things, it makes things that happen maybe later in this section all the more impactful when you see her behave in ways kind of opposite of this.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's probably intentional. Yeah, so Skitter is consistently acting calm through all of this, even though she's pinned to the ground and stabbed. And I think this is because she has so many options at this point, like where she is with her power. She reminds me of the hyper versatile classes in RPGs, like my Necromancer and EverQuest, always having like 4 different ways out of any jam.
I just want one episode of the podcast where you don't bring up EverQuest.
I'm sorry, Scott.
Just one. Nah, I'm just kidding. I love EverQuest. Listen to our episode on it. That was fun. Anyway, That's like the second time we plug that in this podcast, and it will not be the last one. But to me, the most hilarious part about all this and how calm Skitter is that Flechette is seemingly like constantly reminding both the other people in the room, Parian included, that Skitter is under arrest right now. Like a fact that neither of them seem to care about. She's like, seriously, guys, I'm basically a cop here. You're under arrest. You're going to jail. That's the thing that's happening. And they're having this side conversation about trying to help each other out, and her joining. And Flechette's just here like, guys.
Yeah. Taylor's like rolling her eyes, basically. Yeah. So she also mentions to Flechette that she could just pass a message to Ballistic and have Ballistic like come in and find them. So she argues that a fight between Flechette and Ballistic would be like playing tags with guns, which is both highly accurate and also made me chuckle.
Yeah, that's really good imagery. And I think this is the reason why that Skitter knows that she's not actually under arrest here, though, is because despite being on the floor, she kind of has the advantage here because her team doesn't have a series of rules they have to play by. So she still kind of has the upper hand in these negotiations. And I think this is like the first sign of something we're going to enforce again and again throughout the rest of these chapters, which is the idea that the status quo and the actual rule of law in a world with capes is either woefully insufficient or doesn't even matter, because you have these people that don't have to abide by this stuff. They have there's no limit to what they can do, so they don't have to follow these things. And I think that's something we hammer home a lot in this section.
Yeah, we've seen hints of that before, but they definitely explicitly discuss it in this section. Yeah, and during all of this, Ballistic has collapsed like 10 buildings outside Port Brockton Bay.
Yeah, the city really can't catch a break, huh?
Yeah.
Like if only there was some way we could convince the mayor to fight for its continued existence. Maybe like, just hypothetically, like almost murder his son.
Yeah.
But like, what kind of evil psychopath would volunteer to do that?
Well, I'm sure we'll find someone.
It's funny when we set up things that we know that everyone listening to this podcast already knows about.
Yeah. All right. So eventually Skitter wears Parian down to Flechette's horror. So she has Parian call Sierra, probably, I'm guessing, and has her open a safe in the lair and take out $200,000 and tells her to transport it to where she can give it to Parian.
Yeah, this is, again, another example of Taylor acting pretty unilaterally. And we saw in the last section that Tattletale was making some group decisions on her own, and now we see Taylor, like, doing this. She makes this call. She doesn't fill in Ballistic or Coil or anyone else on her team. And a situation that affects the entire team is made by one person. So she feels that she has the authority to do this, even though she probably doesn't.
Yeah. So after Flechette and Parian leave, Skitter extricates herself from her place on the floor. And then we move into 15.7. And you'll have to let me go vomit for a second before I describe Skitter's wound here. Okay. So she's got a long metal spike basically going through her shoulder joint, piercing the bone by using whatever physics breaking magic Flechette's power employs.
Yeah, and it's not even like just piercing the bone. It's like magically grafted to it, right? Like it's like connected to it at a fundamental level. Like there's no clear differentiation between bone and metal anymore. Right. I think this is all really important because we're going to see like how, like, I love the idea of her having these big casual conversations while this terrible injury is being worked on, and we'll get to that. But like, this is a bad injury. Yeah. And she seems pretty unconcerned. I mean, she's a little bit worried, but like, she seems like her main worry is calling a doctor that she can trust and not I'm going to die.
Right. I mean, one interesting thing is that she never at any point is like, I hope this isn't like a permanent disability that I now have this piece of metal in my body that's going to cause me chronic pain. So like you said, she calls Tattletale and arranges to meet with a medic that's more loyal to Tattletale rather than directly going to one of Coil's medics. So she heads back to her lair and she finds Brooks waiting to care for her along with Sierra and her prodigal brother Bryce. Apparently Brooks has an accent. I don't remember him having an accent before. Do you remember that? I don't ever explicitly remember them mentioning an accent, but that doesn't mean that they didn't. So Wormians, confirm this for us. Yeah. Go. It's really important to me. While she waits for Brooks to return with medical tools, she scans over her territory and notes that there are even more people working there than there were before. She notices some people goofing off, and she tells one of the kids to go yell at them for her. And then Bryce, who's standing there watching, gives her lip for doing this.
Yeah, and this conversation on the surface, I think, seems pretty inconsequential, just like Bryce mouthing off again. But the point of exchange that I was most interested in is this idea that why do people insist on testing me, she says. Was it something about being in charge that demanded that they try to establish their dominance? Either way, what did this mean for the city in the long run if anyone who tried to change things for the better was forcing this sort of resistance? And like, I think this goes into Taylor's mindset again, where in her world, I'm trying to help. Like, saying that is enough to where you should never challenge her authority after that point. That you should never question her motives or her actions once she has told you, I'm here to help. You should just go along willingly with everything she says because she says she's here to help.
Yeah, we've been watching her in this position of authority for long enough. I think that we can draw out some patterns, and that is definitely a clear pattern, is that she's extremely frustrated with anyone who doesn't just go along with it. Yeah, so Bryce and Skitter go back and forth for a moment, and then Sierra returns and tries to shut him down. But it's not just irritation that he's nettling her boss. It's actual fear about what Skitter might do to him if he crosses her, because at this point, Sierra has seen Taylor uncork on people too many times.
Yeah, this is a really great moment. And I think it's more so, it's enhanced by the fact that that Taylor acknowledges the fear, but like never at least consciously connects it to what she's actually afraid of. Like we see Taylor several times note that Sierra had fear in her voice when she was saying these things, but we never see her think out, oh, she's afraid of me. She's afraid of what I will do to her brother. And I think that's very interesting that she can see these things but doesn't make that connection. Maybe she's compartmentalizing it away. Maybe she's just refusing to acknowledge it. But it jumped out at me.
Yeah, you're right. And I think she's like, oh, well, I would never hurt Bryce. And it's like, if the circumstances were slightly different, you might actually, like,
right.
You
like,
have done similar things, Taylor.
Like, what if Sierra said no to your order?
Yeah,
like, what would you do? Because she's shown that she feels if someone disobeys her, she has to go above and beyond what we considered normal retaliation to prove, don't do this to me again. So fortunately, Charlotte and Sierra have generally followed her direction so far. I'm interested to see what happens when they stop doing that.
Yeah. Yes, but so among other things, Bryce does make the point that the people of the city wouldn't need saving if it weren't for capes in the first place. And like we mentioned earlier, this is a note that will recur through the rest of this arc.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to discuss this because if we look at this at a really high level, we see Taylor's need almost to make the city better, to change things for the better. And like Bryce kind of says, the only reason that this is even necessary is because of capes. So a cape is trying to fix things using their cape powers. Isn't that just propagating the issue that caused the problem in the first place? How do we define what is better for the city? Who gets to decide that? Won't one cape taking control just encourage more capes to retaliate against them? Like, there's this cycle that we're seemingly on here, and like the desire to help the city doesn't seem to, in any kind of significant way, end that cycle.
Yeah, I mean, I think the obvious solution is what Magneto says. You just wipe out all the humans, so it's only the capes left.
Yeah, I'm sure that would stop all the violence, because there's no inner fighting in the capes at all.
No, I've never noticed that. Yeah. And then we have this moment where Bryce leaves, and his sister is frustrated with how things are going with him. And she says, I keep having to do that. When do we start being a family again? And Taylor thinks, I'm not the person to answer that question. And at this moment, and I think I was supposed to feel this way at this moment, actually, considering what comes later. But I was like, dude, isn't it kind of horrible that Taylor hasn't contacted her dad since the 9 were in town, killing people indiscriminately? Because as a dad, I am folding my arms at Taylor pretty hard right now.
Yeah, you fold the shit out of those arms, Matt, because this is ridiculous. I agree. We hinted towards this a couple weeks ago on the mailbag episode, but I was very surprised that Taylor, in all her constant, almost like unending concern for the people of her territory, has seemingly never checked up on her dad, never visited her dad, never sent any supplies to her dad, as we'll learn later. She's so very protective of these people, but apparently that ends at her father, and that's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a huge sore spot for her, because she could even just like walk near his house and check him out with her bugs, but she like her mind flinches away from even that much.
Yeah, it's too real. It's too much to take. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah. I think again, I think we're going to call out every time in the rest of this chapter where they use the word family, because this is very deliberate, and this is tying into a theme of family, of she's trying to rebuild her family, Taylor's trying to rebuild her Undersider's family, everyone's trying to and struggling with their families over and over again, and we see these bonds like tested and breaking and trying to get back together, and it's like the message here seems to be that we don't know if this is possible. If in the world of capes, can you hold on to your family? And it's a bummer. Yeah,
that's a harsh way of putting it, but accurate. Yeah.
Sorry.
So Brooks is now returns, and he's performing horrifying surgery on Taylor to remove the needle that goes through her shoulder. As she's fully conscious and attending to various tasks in her territory using multiple swarm clones at the same time. So she's literally like multitasking, doing multiple interactions with people with multiple swarm clones. And while the first swarm clones that we saw her make against Leviathan were these vague human-like columns of bugs, the ones she's making now are actually indistinguishable from just bug-covered young women. And throughout the rest of this arc, people repeatedly don't realize that it's not actually her they're talking to. And this is partially enabled because she's using portable cameras and microphones to allow her to hear and see through the clones. And then she uses her swarm voice, which everyone is now used to speak through them.
Yeah, this was almost a bridge too far for me. This is almost hard to believe that people would not notice. But on retrospect, I think you can see it. I think it says something about how often Taylor just has bugs crawling over herself in general, that seeing a figure with bugs crawling all over themselves, people are like, oh yeah, that's her. And the fact that she's able to do this is incredible. Like, not only does it show her multitasking abilities and her ability to kind of leave her own body, it's so like amazing. And she's able to, I mean, multiple, she says, like, there's still limitations to it. Like, she says having two conversations at the same time is almost too much for her. But that Taylor learns, so eventually she's going to be able to do this. I don't know, maybe, the only thing stopping her from controlling this entire city is her range at this point. Mm-hmm. Like, if she could reach out to every corner of Brockton Bay, I fully believe at this point she could control the entire city. Yeah.
Has there been any reference to those relay bugs that she had from Panacea? Did we just assume she doesn't have those anymore?
Yeah, that's the assumption I made. Okay. I assumed that, like Atlas, they were built to not be able to survive after a certain amount of time. And we saw Brian fix Atlas, but we didn't see anything with those. I would assume they'd be a priority, but I think Panacea left before they were able to do anything. So I assume they're dead.
Yeah. But yeah, based on what you said a second ago, I wanted to mention the beat a few arcs ago where she thinks to herself something like, you know, I put the bugs between my costume and my clothes because the idea of having the bugs crawling on my skin was too much for me to take. And we know for a fact now that she has bugs touching her skin, like, fairly frequently, partially because of what we're seeing now with the swarm clones, but also when her mask was destroyed, she was using the bugs as a mask, basically.
Yeah. So I think the most incredible part about that is how little we actually see her acknowledge it. Really, the only idea of the full extent of this is when we see her from other people's perspective, because she's not even thinking about it. It just doesn't even occur to her. Yeah, I have bugs crawling over me. I always do. This is what it is.
Yeah.
This is she's got to be such an intimidating, frightening person at this point. Like, I can't even fully imagine. Like, even with the descriptions from, like, Sierra or was it Charlotte that saw her? One of the two. I think it was Sierra. We were in her interlude. Like, even that, I don't think does it full justice of what she must look like in this moment.
Yeah, yeah. It's really fun to keep track of the things that she's aware of, and then also the things that she's not aware of. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Perian ends up showing up in her territory to have a look around, and it turns out that she has taken the money from Skitter and given it to her people, and then sent them away. But she's going to stay herself. And they talk, or at least Perian and the Swarm clone talk. And Perian feels really judged by Skitter, but Skitter insists that it's not about that. And then Skitter voices more of the idea that we heard a hint of from Bryce, that the status quo is different now, that there's an inherent power imbalance when a small minority of people have powers. And while this imbalance exists, it will have to be capes who maintain order, if only to give people what they need.
And again, like, here's where I think Worm is brilliant, because while I fundamentally disagree with Coyle's and Taylor's plan to establish themselves as the central authority of Brockton Bay, I think Taylor makes a lot of really, really good points here. I think she's making poor choices, and those choices are going to end up getting a lot of people killed, probably innocent people, but the existence of capes have thrown off the power balance in the world. There is really no status quo. There's no peaceful time to return to. It's just a series of escalating conflicts. And in that world, the only ones with the power to accomplish any sort of good are people with powers. So she's kind of right here. And it's like, it's hard to see, because like I'm reading through this section, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know how to counter these points. Like I don't know how to be like, no, I don't think you're right in that, because she seems kind of right. The only area that I was able to grasp onto here was the fact that this isn't a long-term plan. Right now, people are desperate. Right now, her opposition is weak, and right now, she is in the best position to help the people of Brockton Bay. But as Perry encounters her, she says, "And later," and then Taylor is forced to say that she doesn't know, and she doesn't. She honestly doesn't, because she has no long-term plan. And, you know, we see Perian kind of agree to this line of thinking, and we see her very reluctantly agree to Skitter's terms. She says only if Flechette will agree as well. And then Perian finishes the conversation with, "I hate you." And that was answer enough for Taylor. It's like, mm-hmm. I can live with that as long as you do what I want you to. And it's like, there's this it's such a complicated and nuanced conversation, because Taylor's making good points, but she's like Perian says, "You're guilting me into this. You're making me feel bad for not wanting to do this." And I don't think Taylor's consciously doing that, but I just think the way she's presenting the argument is doing that. And it's just like, it's so tough. Like, you really feel for Perian here, because what choice does she have? Like, what does she do? She could just leave, but she feels like she needs to do something as well. It's just really, really tough.
Yeah, and one thing that I'm noticing kind of as you're going through this is I'm like, Skitter is legitimately arguing in favor of Coyle's plan. Like, yeah. She's not, this isn't a put on. She has at some point gone from like, I'm going to do this for Dinah, but I'm not into this being a warlord and holding territory thing, to being like, this is my territory and I'm going to protect my territory, and this is the way to do it. And it's inevitable, and you can't do anything about it, Perian. You got to do it. You got to do what I'm doing, because like she never quite made the decision, but she's convinced herself that what she's doing is the right course of action, even though that's not why she started doing it in the first place. Yeah.
Well, and there's the whole idea that there is already a central cape power in this place. Yes, right. Yes, they're not helping the city as much as they should be, but they're also having to battle these other people that are trying to take over the city as well. So it's like this central power already exists. The Protectorate exists, and we're going to learn a lot more about the Protectorate in the next chapter. But like, the whole idea is, I feel that my way is the right way, so I'm going to do it. It's not like the argument she's making was almost the same reason why the Protectorate was created in the first place. The difference is they went through the government to get their authority. They went through the channels of civilization to do it, instead of just becoming a warlord.
Yeah, and I guess the way the next chapter ends is going to put an interesting contrast on that statement. So I guess we'll have to bring that up when we get there.
Yeah, well, that's Worm. Like, there's no if you make a good point on one side, it'll get conflicted in the other. These things are really complicated.
Yeah. So anyway, Perian Perrin leaves, having given her answer, which is basically yes. And then so pretty much the whole horrible surgery on her shoulder joint has been going on, including dislocating her shoulder and rooting around inside the joint and grinding away at the metal bolt while she's been having this pleasant conversation with Perrin. That's just something I couldn't move on without noting.
Yeah, because I think it ties into her ability to compartmentalize, because now she's doing it physically too. She's literally almost leaving her body to possess almost these swarm clones, where she's not really conscious of her existence as Taylor the real person, but as being Taylor the bug person.
Yeah. It's funny because she has like a laptop open and is presumably like looking and listening, and so Brooks can see what she's doing, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah,
that was just
assumingly hearing all these conversations too. Well, maybe not, because she's talking with her swarm. Yeah, she's not actually talking, which makes it even weirder.
Yeah, right. That was just something that I couldn't help but visualize during those scenes. So yeah, we move on from there into a very interesting character, interesting in her similarities and differences to the character that was our protagonist. And this character is Rebecca, a teenage girl with terminal cancer, lying in her hospital bed and realizing that she's not going to live much longer. She's tired of being a pillar of strength for her whole family, and after her mother leaves her room, she cries, finally mourning her own loss.
Oh, look, another reference to family. Just pointing that out.
Yep.
Yeah, Wildbow has a real gift at getting us into the mindset of these new characters almost immediately. So much so that I think I've made this exact same point before on a different character, but we come into this and we have no idea who Rebecca is. And yet, after just a few paragraphs of being with her, we sympathize so greatly with her. And I think the reason is because he writes these moments of true grief and true almost acceptance of her death in such a real way. Like the things that she points out is that she sees a sign for a fast food restaurant. She's never going to get to eat there again. Never get a special kids meal. She'd never get to read the third book in the Maggie Holt series or see the movie they were making of the first book. She'd never have a real boyfriend. And I think these small inconsequential thoughts of a dying person are just like so real. Like, I mean, that's like, you tend to think that a person as they're dying would think of the big moments, but it's almost just the small things, like the small things that almost seem selfish on the surface, but it's just like, I don't get to do this stuff. I'm never going to get to do this. Like, what if I died before finishing this book, Matt? I would never get to finish Worm. That sucks.
Know. Don't say that, Scott.
I'm going to be on a plane in a couple days. What if the plane crashes?
Don't get on that plane, Scott.
No, but I love how like real and tragic. I mean, before we move on to any of the Cauldron stuff, like this is just a little vignette of a teenage girl dying and the tragedy around that. And it's just like, it shows to me, this is the only thing of Wildbow's I've ever read, obviously, but it shows to me his ability to leave the genre a little bit and just talk about people.
Yeah, right. Totally agree. So yeah, so she's crying, and then suddenly there are people in the room with her, and we recognize them as the doctor and her young protector. The doctor offers to make Rebecca a superhero, but tells her that the risk is very high because at this point in time, which is, I believe, the early 90s, most of the doctor's patients become monsters, and many die outright, but 1 in 7 doesn't get any adverse effects at all. And we have this moment. Rebecca extended a hand to touch the photos, but it was herself she looked at, her fingers so bony, her skin mottled yellow with bruising around the knuckles. I'm already a monster. So we're starting to have a lot of characters who call themselves monsters due to tragic circumstances outside their control.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you pointed this out because it's something I was starting to notice too, and I think it's something that we're going to see throughout the rest of this arc. As well as we're talking about family, we reference the word monster a lot, and we reference the quest to find who is a monster and who isn't, and it's this repeated beat throughout the rest of the story. And the other thing I wanted to point out that we see as a repeated beat throughout the rest of this arc is this real moment of desperation and how tempting things can seem when you're desperate, and how the choices you make when you're desperate seem to have really bad consequences. And we see this throughout Rebecca's mini story, in this interlude, we see the consequences of the choices she made while she was desperate. But I think we see it later in the arc as well with Taylor and the choices that she makes in the midst of this big fight where she's paranoid and freaking out and not sure who to trust.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a question from the mailbag regarding is there some line that you can't cross and still be a hero? And my answer was something along the lines of hero is not a super well defined word, and not a super well defined concept. And I have a similar thought about what is a monster. Like you have the people who are the least bad, who seem the most willing to call themselves monsters, and you have pretty bad people who will insist that they're not monsters. And it just makes me wonder if it's possible to be a hero and a monster at the same time.
Yeah, I think it absolutely is. Yeah, I like that line. I thought it a lot.
Cool. Well, yeah. So Rebecca Costa Brown accepts the deal, stating that she would take the deal even if there were no chance of being normal. So later she takes the cauldron vial, and not only recovers to a healthy state, but she can fly, think faster and sharper than before, and can crush concrete with her fingers. So did you guess, at what point did you guess that this was Alexandria's head that we're in?
Not until this moment right here. Right. I honestly assume we were in the head of like one of the travelers or something else, because I failed to actually pay attention to the dates at the top of the section headings my first time around. Had I been paying attention to the years in those section headings, I might have gotten here, but no, I didn't see this reveal coming.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I didn't either. So yeah, the doctor ends up asking her for 2 years of service, after which she can decide if she wants to stay. Which
is just like textbook manipulation. Like, it's just 2 years, just help us for 2 years, and then, you can go home to your family. And it's like it's just one more job thing. It's just like, it's just a textbook way to manipulate someone into doing what you want them to do.
Yeah, that's great. I didn't notice that, but you're exactly right. That is what that is. So in our next section, roughly 2 years later, young Alexandria meets with Eidolon, legend, and hero. Professor Manton is also there, along with, quote, the boy with the math powers, and another guy who stares into space.
Yeah, we also get a name drop for Contessa here, who was presumably the same girl who was in the hospital with the doctor, and presumably the same now older woman who met with the Triumvirate in Legends chapter. I'm guessing. We got a name, but we still don't know anything else. So there's that.
Yep. I like this exchange between Alexandria and Legend, because it says more about Alexandria's character than we've really seen, or it shows maybe a side of her. It shows, I'm really interested in how it contrasts and compares to Taylor, honestly. So she's talking about her costume and it being dark gray and black. And she says, and it's easier to get the blood out, Alexandria added. Legend frowned. You get a lot of blood on your costume? I hit really hard, she said, deadpan. He didn't seem to appreciate the humor. It didn't matter.
Yeah, I like the Taylor comparison a lot here, because you're right that Alexandria picks a very dark costume, black villainy costume, which is the same thing Taylor picks, and it's for different reasons. I think Taylor specifically picked it because at this point in her life she was not comfortable in bright colors and positive type of imagery like that. It's just not where she was in her life. But yeah, there's definitely a correlation here, and the idea of not worrying about blood on your costume is great.
Yeah. Right. Like, I think I've compared Alexandria to Superman before in terms of her powers, but Superman would never be like, yeah, I have to worry about, splattering people. Like, that's
yeah, absolutely
not a concern of his.
And I think, as well as be a good reflection of Taylor, I think this is a really good way of directly contrasting who Legend is as a person and who Alexandria is as a person, because he did not like that. Like, he did not like the joke. Blood on your costume is not something that Legend finds funny to joke about.
Yeah, right. He's probably more experienced, and he's probably had to deal with blood on his costume. So yeah, Alexandria fronts a proposal to the other. They're not the Triumvirate yet, certainly, but to the other capes gathered in the room, that they should form an organization under the purview of the U.S. government. So basically, we're watching the birth of the Protectorate.
And what a birth it is, because it's birthed as a conscious attempt to mislead the government into thinking that they actually have any real oversight in the capes, whilst just secretly working to further their own goals. So, yay.
Yay. Yeah, so Alexandria and the Doctor argue for the need for such an organization and for the need for Cauldron due to the fact that normal triggers are creating far more villains than heroes.
Yeah, and I think this is Cauldron's noble goal and the beginning of the lie that poor Legend believes from here on to hit that moment at the end of the Slaughterhouse 9 section. So we learned that Alexandria kind of knew this was bullshit from the start, but no one else did. At this point, Eidolon does not know. So
Yeah.
That's very interesting information. But not only did Alexandria know, but she was kind of in on it from the beginning. It was her decision. It was her strategy.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, she has an 8-stage plan for integrating parahumans into society, and she mentions an idea that obviously turns into the wards along the way. Another tranche of her plan is that Rebecca Costa Brown, in her civilian identity, will be in a position of power in the government, working on behalf of her plan in synergy.
Yeah, and I think the integration strategy is something that we've heard Pigot talk about before when she was talking to Weld about his importance as a member of the Protectorate and as kind of a symbol of accepting capes into society, even ones that look weird. Matt, I can't remember if we've heard the name Rebecca Costa Brown before. Outside of this chapter, it sounds really familiar to me, but maybe I'm just making stuff up.
Yeah, so I thought that we had heard the name before now too, but I did a Google web search thing and I couldn't find it in the story prior to this point. So if anybody knows if we're going crazy or not, please point to where that would be.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. So Doormaker is revealed to be the cape who is the boy with the 1,000-yard stare. So he's the cape who keeps making the portals that we've seen Cauldron using.
Yeah, and this is kind of the entire key to them being so safe and confident as an organization is all connected to this one guy, which makes you think if his powers were specifically designed for this purpose or if they just got really lucky with the early vial testing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a beat that's easy to skip over, the fact that the portal, he's basically yeah, this is a door into another Earth entirely.
Yeah, and he seems to have a labyrinth level of disconnect from himself. So obviously, at least to me, we're seeing the effect of these powers has on your mind with these kind of weird powers. And they're both very similar in that she kind of goes to another world too. She just brings the stuff from that world here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Yeah, so we're getting a ton of backstory questions answered here, but we're still being teased because when everyone leaves, except for the Doctor and Alexandria mentions, "Oh, you didn't mention our long-term plans."
Yeah, and this got my brain turning, Matt, because originally we were of the idea that the noble goal was to make sure there were enough good capes and to make sure they could fight back against the Endbringers. But at this point in the story, the timeline, the Endbringers have not shown up yet. So the long-term plans are clearly not just that. My guess at this point that if Cauldron is not fighting against evil capes, obviously not fighting against the Endbringers specifically, that maybe Cauldron's battle is more with the source of all these powers, whatever those multi-dimensional beings we keep seeing in the trigger visions are. And this kind of ties into what Taylor was talking about in the last chapter, that the only thing capable of restoring order to a world of capes is a cape. So maybe Cauldron's thing is, to defeat the source of this power, we have to find a way to make strong capes to fight back against it. I don't know. That's my plan. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, if this source of this power is by itself inherently bad or not, or it's just human nature that we take this thing and twist it to our terribleness, but that's my running theory, at least.
Cool. So 4 years later, and Alexandria, joined by the rest of the Protectorate and some local heroes, watches a 45-foot tall monstrosity emerge from the earth. One-eyed, horned, covered in obsidian, Behemoth strikes down capes from a distance with lightning and fire. And aside from being giant and Endbringer tough, he's also a dynakinetic, meaning he can manipulate energy of various forms, and he can also violate the Manton limit.
Yeah, at first I was all excited because the first thing Behemoth did was use fire, and it tied into each one of them is an element type thing that I guessed when we saw Leviathan. But then he started using lightning and hitting really hard, and that kind of got thrown out the window. But this is still really cool, and I really appreciate how we get to see this battle from the perspective of people who have no idea what the hell Behemoth is. Like, I think we see Alexandria in this moment assume that it finally happened, and a super powerful cape was created naturally that's stronger than anything Cauldron can do. Obviously, we know this isn't true. They were never human, so it's not just someone triggering to have this power. But it's this really cool moment where they're like, this thing arrives and they try to fight it, and they're like destroyed. Like, so many people die in this moment. And it's the first time an Endbringer showed up.
Yeah, I remember this scene being really effective the first time I read it, and just really feeling this sense of despair and shock, as like you get the sense that even Alexandria isn't used to like watching her subordinates just drop like flies around her, and you really feel kind of the hopelessness that these Endbringers are meant to embody.
Yeah, you get the idea that at this point in the story, there was nothing this powerful. Like that the Triumvirate existed and were successful because they were manufactured to be powerful. And so they were the most powerful thing on the planet. And then suddenly that whole status quo shifts with this new arrival of this new thing. And yeah, it is tragic. It is this sudden realization amidst death and destruction that I'm not the most powerful thing on the planet anymore.
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, we skip away from that. We're just kind of skipping forward through time, if that's not clear. And Alexandria is swearing herself in, along with the rest of her team, in some sense officially legitimizing the Protectorate under the aegis of the U.S. government. Yeah,
it's just like the illusion of security. We're here for you, U.S. We're working with you, but we're not really.
Yep, just like how the real world works. And now we get to see the video that Pigot. We get to see what was happening in the video that Pigot was watching from Alexandria's point of view. So Alexandria arrives at the scene and is furious that they're keeping Siberian in place by letting her munch on a victim. And she's thinking, I'm in this to save lives. Sacrificing someone for the sake of the plan? She knew it made sense, that it was even necessary, but it left her shaken, a sick feeling in the pit of her stomach. So does this remind us of anyone, Scott?
Yeah, I think her name rhymes with Schmaler. I do love this, though, because we see in Alexandria that you don't jump down this dark path all at once. You go step by step. It's slowly. It starts with these half-truths, with these lies that you're telling people. And then as things get harder and more desperate, you take small steps that are justified in the moment, but lead you further and further down this, for the greater good again. And then what happens? Well, we'll just see where this interlude finishes.
That's right. Yeah, so Siberian, as we already know, owns the 4 powerful capes about as hard as we expect. She kills Hero immediately.
Yeah, she rips him in half. And I think this is a really good reminder just how smart and lucky our heroes were in the Nina section, by the fact that their smart way of approaching Siberian, and the fact that Siberian was just playing with Amy rather than outright destroying her. Because, damn, Siberian, it's easy to forget because our heroes survived against her, but she is powerful.
Yeah. And just because we don't get to see Eidolon do his thing very much, I'm going to pull out just this section. Eidolon was trying to heal Hero to teleport people out of danger when Alexandria and Legend proved unable, in changing up his abilities every few seconds to throw something new at Siberian in the hopes that something would affect her. She waded through zones of altered time, through lightning storms and force fields, tore through barricades of living wood, and slapped aside a projectile so hyperdense that its gravitational field pulled cars behind it.
Yeah, so Eidolon's pretty strong. I'm still not entirely sure how his power works, Matt. So he just automatically gains whatever power would be best to handle the current situation. Does he pick them? Can he only get one at a time? What's the limitation with this?
I mean, I think just going on what you should know now, he does seem to need to switch them out. And then also there's what he says a bit later in this where or maybe it was when he was talking to Legend earlier. I guess it doesn't matter. They're the same scene, where he's like, yeah, I'll try, but my power doesn't give me what I want, only what I need. And I guess that's kind of open to interpretation, obviously, but that's what we know at this point.
He's like a character arc in a person. He's trying to get what he wants, but he's conflicting with what he needs.
Well, you can't always get what you want, Scott.
Okay, I'm not.
But if you try sometime.
No. Stop it.
All right. So Alexandria gets too close, and Siberian rakes her face, carving out her eye. It had been so long since she'd felt pain.
Yeah, I love that quote. It's a great beat. And it's something we had technically already seen before because we knew about it for a while. We saw it through the video. But the fact that we're in Alexandria's head in this moment, the shock that she faces when she sees that she's been injured for the first time in like years, it just really helps sell this and make this point land all the more.
Yeah. So later in the hospital, Alexandria and the doctor discuss that they know that Siberian is William Manton's power, and that Siberian is probably a projection based on the vial that he stole. We also learned something more of his background, that he went through a nasty divorce and he gave his daughter a cauldron vial, and that didn't work out for whatever reason. I don't know if we're clear on that. And then he escaped with a vial of his own.
Yeah, this is really interesting because we learn that he's not just projecting a woman, like he's not just projecting himself as a woman, but specifically projecting what his daughter looks like. And at first I was like, that's really creepy because she's naked. So is he sexualizing his daughter? But then the more I thought about it and I went back and checked, like Siberian is naked a lot, but it's never in like a really hypersexualized kind of way. Like there's never really any stops to point out that she's naked or to draw attention to it in any kind of creepy kind of way. So it's just stated matter-of-factly. So that's good, I guess.
Yeah, I kind of think of it as like, you don't go out of your way to point out that a tiger is naked. It's just a tiger.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how people see her, I think.
Yeah, and also it makes sense why he was so motherly, or I guess fatherly, to Bonesaw, because if he is dealing with whatever happened to his daughter, he sees this young girl that he wants to take under his wing and protect. So that makes sense too.
Yeah, I think that's definitely in the mix somewhere. I agree. Yeah, so we also see that Idolin probably is in on the mysterious other plans and projects that the Doctor and Alexandria are up to, because his power tipped him off at some point.
Yeah, when we first learn the truth of this through Legend's eyes, there's a real sense of betrayal here. But we kind of learn here that Idolin was never intended to know about this stuff, but his power just informed him of it, so they had to fill him in or risk losing him. I think the important thing here, though, is not just that he learns about it, that he continues to participate, even though he knows.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so the Doctor wants to leave Manton be, and Alexandria is horrified by this. So the Doctor's reasoning is she thinks Siberian roaming around will send people flocking to the Protectorate. And Alexandria won't accept this, and then the Doctor plays down her suggestion, like, oh, yeah, I didn't really mean that. I must just be emotional right now. Yeah,
she plays it down. But we see that Siberian is still out there roaming free. They have not seemingly mounted any kind of specific get Manton strategy. In fact, the fact that they've kept this so secret means that anyone trying to track down and defeat the Nine might have died because they didn't have key information. So, I mean, this is kind of a big deal to withhold this information. And it is another slide down the slope for Alexandria, I think, because she notes the falsehood in the Doctor's body language, but she specifically chooses to ignore it. She writes it up to her eye being damaged, so she's still getting used to having one eye, and she's just misreading it. She explains it away, which is something that Taylor does all the time. And then the Doctor kind of placates her, saying that Manton is the exception to what they're trying to do, not the rule. We know this to be false, and Alexandria doesn't really believe it either, but she doesn't do anything about it. She continues to go along with it.
Yeah. There's I think just what you said, all they had to do was tell the rest of the Protectorate, oh yeah, by the way, Siberian is a projection. There's probably some person around her who is vulnerable. That would totally change the strategy of how people deal with Siberian.
Yeah.
But they didn't tell them that.
People definitely died because they did not share this information. Good
right.
People.
Yeah, totally. So later, I mean, I think that was kind of a watershed, because later we see Alexandria fly into a war zone, pick up a dying boy, and offer him the same choice that she was given years ago. Do you want to live? And he asks in his language, basically asks, are you an angel? And she replies, no, not an angel, which I just love that exchange.
Yeah.
And as she puts him, as she takes him, she thinks to herself, but they would be alive. That was the most important thing. They had been destined to die in places where the wars never stopped, or where plague was rampant, rescued from the brink of death. So like all the capes we've seen, Alexandria has, in her case, not a specific trauma per se, but a background that biases her in a certain direction. So the result is that she has no compunctions about scooping up these people and subjecting them to experimentation, because to her mind it's better than the inevitable death they would have met. And yet again, because this is Worm, we can't say for a certainty that she's totally wrong.
Yeah, for sure. And I agree that this is a part where we're really supposed to feel like a watershed moment for Rebecca, for Alexandria, and how she has kind of lost her way a little bit here. Because the thing about this whole idea that life is better than death, no matter what the form, is that choice needs to be left up to the one whom it'll affect. Alexandria is making that choice for these people. She's stripping them of their agency and forcing them to suffer in the name of good without giving them that option. The results of this is horrible mutation, memory loss. These people are abandoned and ridiculed by the public at large. And she's making that choice for them by arguing that being alive is better. But, to quote Pet Sematary, Matt, sometimes dead is better.
And I'll have to read that sometime.
I can't believe you've never seen or read that. That's incredible.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, I think there's something that's just so monstrous about this idea that she sort of gives them the choice of do you want to live, and then erases their memory of ever having made that choice. So they basically have to live the rest of their lives, assuming they live the rest of their lives as a monster with no memory. And
it's a bullshit choice too, because you're not really telling them the entire information. Like, if you tell a dying person, do you want to live? Yeah, yes, they're going to make that choice. It's a choice made in a moment of desperation, which is a point I've been hammering home again and again. And so, yeah, they're going to make that choice. But you're intentionally leaving out the most important parts of the choice, which are the consequences of it.
And we know that she's aware of this hypocrisy, because she thinks to herself, and here I am administering poison with a smile on my face. She turned and walked away, which is, and that's what she was thinking of the people who were administering chemotherapy to her. So she's become basically, she has become the monster that she was kind of afraid of being. But she just goes on.
Yeah. And I think that's the most important thing, it's not enough to come to this realization. You have to act on it. And she's not. She knows it's wrong, and she's doubling down on it. And I think, again, this is something we do see in Taylor a lot. We see that sometimes, as good as Taylor is at compartmentalization, there are times when she realizes what she is doing is wrong, but she finds a way to explain it away anyway, and continue to do it. And that's the most dangerous part about this whole thing, is that, you can mess up, you can make a mistake, you can make a bad choice, and you learn from it and you grow from it. But if you refuse to acknowledge it on that level, and if you decide to double down on it, then you are kind of becoming a monster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then we get to see later the exact same meeting with Legend, from Legend's interlude, but from her perspective. And mainly here, what we learn is that, for one, Eidolon's power is waning, and he apparently needs these booster shots. And also that they were all aware of Legend's skepticism and suspicion of them, and they were all kind of acting to deceive him intentionally.
Yeah, and the weirdest part of this to me was that they still think even if Legend finds out the truth, he wouldn't actively move against them. And I really hope they're wrong. Because I like Legend so much. But I'm really interested in the idea of Eidolon's power waning and why this is. We've already mentioned that he looked like a middle-aged man. It gets me wondering, was he like the first successful Vile cape, or was he just one of the original capes, and powers as you age start to wear off and go away? Because we know he's a middle-aged man, could he be like the oldest cape on Earth? That's a very interesting train of thought, and I hope we find out more about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. So finally, they're discussing things. They're saying, it looks like a lot of our plans don't seem to be working. So that just leaves kind of the backup plan, which is Coil. Yeah, he doesn't even know it, but everything rests on his shoulders.
And here we are. This is what we've been leading up to the whole time. The long path of Alexandria, the hero who's doing this to help people, the woman who created the and proliferated the organization that stands for hope and heroism in the world, that slammed her fist on the table at the idea of letting someone like Siberian roam free, has now put every part of her plan on the shoulders of a man like Coil. A man who is dangerous, corrupt, who tortures people for fun because he knows he can get away with it, who kidnaps children and drugs them into subservience, who lies and manipulates his way into money and power. She has put everything on him. And this is what happens, Matt. This is what happens when you stretch your moral goals for the greater good. You make small compromises, choices in moments of desperation, choices that have consequences you couldn't begin to understand or calculate in the moment. And I think Alexandria is a good person who did bad things for a good reason. And now she's here, putting the fate of everything she's worked on the shoulders of a man like Coil. And look how much that ties into what's going on with Taylor. I mean, like, we could spend the rest of the podcast talking about how these two things specifically relate. But Taylor is putting everything on Coil, putting everything on this interaction with Coil. And it's so beautifully wound together and wrapped up. I love it.
Yeah. I could go on, like you said, for quite a bit about this, but there's more than enough in the rest of this arc that we could tie into that. So I'll just move ahead.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, so we move into 15.8 we're back with Skitter, and she's calling Coil and telling him that Parian is interested in joining his organization, but Coil does not like that Parian won't officially call herself part of the group because it kind of defeats the purpose of exercising and demonstrating total control over the city. But he does concede that he'll reach out to her through a proxy.
Yeah, I really like this moment because it does show this obvious disconnect between what Coil is trying to accomplish and what Taylor thinks they're trying to do. Because for Taylor, it's all about that end goal. It's all about help people. Control the city, which will help people and give people what they need. In Taylor's mind, Parian's compromise helps with that because she's going to protect her territory. She's going to help her people there. It doesn't matter to her whether she's officially in Coil's group or not. But that's not what Coil's trying to do here. That's not what his end goal is. And the fact that she still can't see that is like really frustrating. It's like, Taylor, come on. Yeah.
So she ends up having to use Atlas to help her get dressed because her shoulder wound hurts. And there's still a dart in the bone. It's just shaved down to the point where it's less obstructing. This would be horrible. So I know from experience that this would be horrible.
Yeah, I think sometimes we forget because like an injured Taylor is so effective that we forget how much constant pain she must be in for all this stuff. And I think this is something to think about as we get into the battle scene that's coming up here. Mm-hmm.
So she's thinking to herself, my dad hadn't heard from me in some time. If I died, well, perhaps not as great a shock as it might otherwise be. I knew it would hit him as hard as my mom's death had, but that he'd be devastated. But again, he'd recover. He'd recover. Well, that's all fine then, Taylor. Okay, yeah. Thanks, Taylor.
Yeah,
from all dads everywhere. Thanks.
Yeah, he's doing great. He's fine. This is a really good reminder that once again, Taylor has failed to actually consider her father in just about every single choice she's made so far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so she flies on Atlas to join Trickster and Genesis in their attack/meeting with the mayor. So just to refresh everyone, the point here is they're going to confront the mayor and convince him that he needs to argue in favor of the continuation of Brockton Bay in Washington. So the plan, is he has to communicate the right message.
Yeah, and I think it's really important we keep that in mind as we work through the events of this next scene, because Taylor's not here to save a person. She's not here to protect her people. She's here to intimidate an authority figure. There's no real noble goal here. It's just a means to an end. It's gangster work. It's not great.
Yeah. Yeah, I like your description of it as gangster work. This is very, very low for her, and she's so distracted that she's not even thinking about it.
Yeah.
So she's being ultra paranoid because she knows that Coyle wants her dead. Because remember last week we learned that Tattletale is absolutely certain that Coyle wants her dead, and is absolutely certain that Coyle's going to try to kill her, probably on this mission. So she creates multiple high-fidelity swarm clones and places them here and there around the mayor's property. And she sends one of them to go interact with Trickster and Genesis, who is in creature from a Japanese horror movie form.
I really like that. The things she comes up with are so incredible. It's so good. I still really can't get over the fact that they're so used to seeing Skitter with bugs swarming all over her that a copy of her body made entirely of bugs is not noticeably different to them. Listen to this, centipedes and bugs chained end to end for the hair. Larger bugs formed the bulk of the legs, torso, and the core of the head. Smaller bugs filled the gaps, while flying insects clustering together formed the arms and parts too unwieldy to be supported by the rest. Like the face. Gross.
Yeah. It's amazing.
So gross.
I love to see this in CGI. I mean, my imagination is probably sufficient, though. Yeah, so Trickster points out the mayor's house. Skitter scouts it, but has a bit of trouble doing so because, unlike the rest of Brockton Bay, the mayor's house is not completely infested with bugs already. And she finds at the dinner table the mayor, his wife, a pair of twin daughters, the son, and another young woman who isn't necessarily expected to be there.
Yeah, so there are kids there. This man's family is there, and they see this as a good thing because our plan will work better because their family's there.
Right, because Trickster's plan is basically scare the crap out of the family and then deliver the message. And Taylor doesn't like this, as we expect her not to, but it isn't really a good position for her to object strenuously with the threat she's currently under. And she's paying more attention to wondering if Trickster is the one who's gunning for her, noting how easily it would be for him to kill her with his power.
Yeah, and despite all these warning alarms going off, Taylor continues. Despite that she's in this compromising situation, there's family there, the general ickiness of the plan in general, which she seems certainly aware of, she continues. Because, again, in moments of desperation, we make bad choices.
Yeah. I mean, she's saying basically, we're not going to hurt them though, right? And Trickster's like, right. And then she thinks, well, I could do that. It wasn't so different from what I'd done on my first job with the Undersiders. I'd terrorize hostages for a greater purpose, and I could do the same with a family for the same reason. So she's now justifying a terrible thing by placing it in context of other terrible things she's done that she ended up regretting. Oh, this is okay because I did a similar bad thing before.
And this is what we talk about when we say that the actions we do move that yardstick that measures the limits of your morals every time you do it, that there's a new status quo as far as that. Because once you've justified an action once, it becomes easier and easier to justify it again. And that's what Taylor is doing here. And that is so dangerous.
Yeah. So Trickster, as they're preparing to attack, he criticizes how slow she seems to be with getting her bugs ready. And she calls him out on being hostile, and Trickster admits to being irritated with her for stepping on Ballistic's toes. And this exchange culminates in her admitting that the Skitter standing with him is a swarm clone, and then pointing out another swarm clone and saying, that's the real that's the real Skitter.
Yeah, meanwhile, she's just sitting in a forest with a laptop out.
Right.
It's really easy to understand how angry Trickster is with her in this moment, because I think if the Travelers had tried to do a similar thing that she did, if they did that to the Undersiders and Taylor found out about it, imagine how pissed off she would be. Like, she'd probably refuse to work with them anymore.
Yeah, I agree. So yeah, Genesis, they attack. Genesis flies her terrifying form in through the window, and then Skitter follows with her swarm, which she then materializes into another clone once she's in the dining room. Trickster enters as well, and he speaks for the group. The young man of the family surreptitiously tries to use his phone, and Skitter uses spider web tied to Atlas to yank it out of his hand.
I don't know why, but the image of a giant flying beetle yanking an iPhone out of someone's hand is the most hilarious thing in the world to me. I burst out laughing.
Awesome. So eventually Skitter notices that the family seems more angry than scared, and then figures out why this is and tries to signal Trickster with her bugs, but he doesn't see it. And he takes one of the twin girls hostage and then finally sees the message, but too late, because the older boy is Triumph and the girl is either Prism or Ursa Aurora. Skitter's not sure at this point. Triumph takes out Trickster surgically with his superpowered shout. This opens up a lengthy fight where Skitter is basically remotely dueling these two heroes, figuring out their strengths and weaknesses on the fly, while also trying to rescue Trickster.
Yeah, and just like every fight we cover here, we're going to deal with this rather quickly. We'll just note that the action here is cool, but we're only going to really stop to discuss the important character beats within this action, because just describing action by itself is kind of boring.
Yeah. So we move into 15.9. And one, as you said, character beat is that in the course of explicating her analysis for figuring out who the capes in the room were, we see that she clearly doesn't know that Battery is dead.
Yeah, and this made me really sad. I pondered aloud on the podcast for the first time. We learned of Battery's death if Skitter would take some level of responsibility for it if she found out about it. That was a hypothetical question. Of course she would. But we see that she still doesn't know in this moment, and this guilt could potentially be saved for a later date.
Yeah. So the combat goes, she catches the girl with the tripwire and starts binding her with silk. We see shortly that the girl is Prism when she finally uses her power to create duplicates. She ends up having to sting Triumph more and more fiercely, including injecting him with venom from the wasps, which she usually doesn't do. And ultimately she buries him under bugs and just goes to town on him. And that seems to subdue him. Skitter comes in on foot, so she's been doing all that with just her bugs, but then she comes in on foot to retrieve the unconscious Trickster. Prism escapes from her confinement. The two of them duel. To me, the most interesting bit here overall is that she's just having to reverse engineer how Prism's power works, like on the fly. And also she seems to have leveled up in her combat skills again, because she basically trounces Prism and Triumph. And that's even with the fact that she's exposed her real body, which she doesn't even have to do.
Yeah, and let's not forget that she's injured here. And it's very interesting, because as most parahumans fight and get hurt, their general effectiveness lowers with each injury. Injuries really don't do anything to Taylor. She's as effective with her power with a broken arm or a broken leg or whatever. And it's really quite astonishing that her arm is basically useless at this point, but she's still so good at what she does. And I totally agree that Taylor utilizing her toolbox to figure out Prism is a really, really fascinating read. You kind of see her work step by step through what her clones do and what they don't do. And you're right, she's alone here with two pretty effective capes. With all the advantages on their side, they have time on their side. Like, all they have to do is wait her out. So the fact that she fares so well here is pretty amazing.
Yeah. I'm reminded of in our very first episode of this show when we were talking about how bugged powers don't seem that strong and don't seem that impressive, and how like it was kind of a good choice, because I think I said something along the lines of like, if she ever does become strong with this power, it's going to be a brutal slog. And I think that at this point Taylor has earned her power, basically. She's kind of earned her impressiveness level.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the most important part, right? Like, I think we've had a slow build up to stuff like this. It's not just overnight Taylor became good and could do all these things with her power. She's learned, and she's continually learning, and she's continually finding new things to do. And that's very natural and realistic. And so it doesn't seem, once again, Mary Sue-ish that she just knows how to do all these things.
Totally. Yeah, so finally she baits Prism into consolidating into a particular body, and then she makes that body fall awkwardly off the roof using preset silk lines and injuring her, actually, we find out later. Skitter then makes her way over to Triumph and finds that she may have gone too far in a few places.
Yeah, that's putting it really fucking mildly, Matt.
Yep. So the mayor comes out with a shotgun and she makes it clear to him that his son will die unless he complies with her demands. Pretty horrible, actually. So
yeah.
I cleared the bugs away from Triumph, giving the mayor a visual of his superhero son lying on the ground struggling. To make his struggles a little more pronounced, I briefly increased the pressure, shifting the bugs to limit the available oxygen. I wasn't sure exactly how much danger he was in, but he wasn't doing well. As much as I wanted to pressure the mayor, I was ready to apply the EpiPen as soon as the second Triumph's breathing slowed down enough. So yeah, we're just systematically crossing these thresholds, aren't we? Just complete recklessness with this guy's life here. And he's clearly not somebody who deserves it, at least as far as she knows.
Yeah, I think this is another really watershed moment in Taylor's journey, as we'll call it. On the back end, like, this has been an arc all about family and the bonds of family and the connections that drive us. And we see in this moment Taylor torturing a son to scare his father into compliance. And again, let's be reminded here that the end goal is not a noble one. It is a gangster move, like we said, to let the government of the city know who's really in charge, to pressure them into voting a certain way. All while they weren't 100% certain if the mayor was going to not vote their way in the first place. It's just, we need insurance that he's going to say, so we need to do this. And in this moment, Taylor tortures and nearly kills an innocent man. The mayor of Brockton Bay has not done anything to Taylor, and his son certainly has not done anything. So in this moment, we see her do this, and we can try to explain it away. We can say, yes, she was in a really bad state. She was very paranoid. She was very focused on the potential threat from Coyle throughout this mission, so she wasn't focusing as much as she was. And she was desperate, and she was reckless, and she made a bad choice. But these are just excuses. They're not real reasons, and they don't erase what she just did here.
Yeah. I mean, suffice to say, he's rapidly getting worse and worse, and then at a certain point, he's basically in anaphylaxis, and she says he's almost stopped breathing. I said, almost in shock at what this had come to. I have to point out the word, the sentence structure there, at what this had come to.
Yeah,
it's like passive voice,
right?
With no, yeah. You know what I mean?
It's not like the situation just happened. You did this, Taylor. You did this, and for what? Why? Why did you do this? To ensure that Coyle doesn't abandon Brockton Bay, because if it gets condemned, he'll leave. So you can save Dinah. How? How does this help you save Dinah? What's your plan to get Dinah back? What's your great noble justification here? There isn't one. This is just, she's backed into a corner, she's desperate, and she doesn't know what else to do, and she lashed out, and that lashing out almost gets someone killed. Yeah.
All right, so the next chapter I'm sure will be much more cheerful, though. So we move into 15.10. Skitter flees the mayor's property on foot, with Atlas carrying the unconscious trickster. She's just a roiling mess of thoughts of emotions here, because she realizes, in some sense, the gravity of what she just did, and it does bother her for a while. And then she kind of disconnects because she's running through these dark woods and feeling out ahead of herself with the bug senses, and she just kind of lets herself stop worrying about it.
Yeah, and it's amazing, right? Because you see her work through her cycle. She cycles with reasons for why. And the first thing she does is try to blame the mayor. Damn him. How big was his property? He could still afford to hire someone to cut his grass, eat a nice dinner. He could do this while everyone else was suffering. Luckily, this doesn't work because it's total fucking bullshit. How dare you, mayor, eat dinner? I hope your son dies. Like, it's nonsense. But you can see her trying to find an excuse to search for a reason. And when she realizes she can't do that, she zones out and she compartmentalizes and she literally runs away from her problems. I talked last week about in the Brian Taylor scene when Taylor says that starts talking about how she shrinks the world to make her problems seem small and manageable, and she uses the sheer number and size of her bugs to do that. And I said that I was a little surprised by that because I had never seen Taylor talk like that. And I realize now that she was just describing her compartmentalization in a way that makes her sound good. It's not that she's seeing the world as big and shrinking her apart, her
perspective.
Yeah. Her problems and her perspective small. It's just her literally escaping. And it's running from her consequences and her decisions by running into her bugs. And she does that with just jogging here. And it's like I'm so mad at her in this moment. Like, I'm so furious with her. And, you know, the people that think we're being too mean to Taylor are probably not going to like this episode because it's been a lot of that. But I am so angry with her in this moment that she did this again. And she just keeps doing this. And it's so frustrating.
Well, I think the book is very clearly pointing us in this direction at this point in time.
Because, I think so too.
I mean, and it's not like things get better at this point. Like, she's just a mess right now. Like, she's on some level aware that she's a mess right now. But she kind of has to keep moving forward now because that's just who she is. Yeah,
and she just keeps making bad choices. I mean, again and again. We haven't even gotten into the heartbreaking moments yet, but Jesus. Yeah.
So as she and Genesis fly away, Genesis now carrying Trickster, she calls Tattletale, who is very confused that nobody tried to kill her.
It's almost as if Tattletale was wrong.
Is that possible?
That's never happened before.
It's never happened, yeah. So then after that call, she thinks about calling Gru for reassurances, but it doesn't feel right to her, and she doesn't.
Yeah, I think this is more evidence that this relationship is pretty doomed to fail. Because when something bad or good happens to me, my partner is the first person I want to call, either for help, for support, or just to talk through things. And I think the fact that she can't let herself do this with Gru is pretty telling on the state of their relationship and what it is in. I think this is another hint that these two guys are just not going to end up together.
Mm-hmm. So while they're flying, Genesis drops some more traveler's knowledge on us. She says they've been together for 2 years, and only half of the reason they can't split up is Noelle.
Yeah, and again, we talk about family again. They talk about they've been here together 2 years. Genesis doesn't know what to call it. I think it's Taylor that used the word family, and she's like, well, we've been together 2 years. I don't know what else you call it. But this is, again, focusing on family, and this is specifically the family you choose. And Matt, I have a Noelle prediction that I'm going to save for the end of the episode. It doesn't help with the only half the reason part of what you said, but I'm pretty confident in this one. I think it's a good one.
All right. I'm looking forward to it. So Skitter heads back to her territory, and she uses her bugs to gather some clothes and supplies to herself. And for the first time in a while, we see her walk the streets in her identity as Taylor from her own perspective. And I love this imagery that she's perceiving as she walks of algae and weeds and rats thriving in the cracks of the city.
Yeah, it's a lot of wonderful, thematically rich imagery here, as Taylor kind of ruminates on the end of the world, what Jack killing everyone would look like. And it's not too dissimilar from how the plant life has taken back the world here. And there's a lot you can read into this if you want to. You could speculate that Taylor, while dealing with the consequence of her actions, is now considering that maybe things would be better if the world ends. You can talk about how the weeds taking back the earth from all the construction and the civilization could be a metaphor for capes, that the existence of capes has upset the status quo, and those weeds are slipping between everything, and eventually taking civilization and order and returning it to chaos. There's a whole lot of rich imagery here that I think is pretty freely open to interpretation. Those are the things that jumped out at me, but if you interpret it a different way, cool.
Yeah, I think that's all very evocative. I didn't necessarily see it that way, but I appreciate that perspective. Yeah, so she arrives then at her dad's house.
Oh boy.
And it's just terribly sad. So it turns out that he's had to pawn some of his possessions just to afford food, basically.
And again, how the hell is this something that Taylor let happen? Again, we've seen her constantly worried about the people of her district and how she has to make sure they're well fed, but she has to make sure they have water and power, and how guilty she was every single time she had to leave them to fend for themselves when she had to go do something else. And why has this seriousness of protection not extended to her father? Why is he left out of her worry and concern? Why does she only turn to him when she seemingly doesn't have anywhere else to go? It's just such, to me, just a total lack of respect for him as her parent. And it pisses me off.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, and I think we might get into that in a minute, but like, why did she even bother coming, you know?
Yeah,
there'll be opportunity to talk about that in a second. So yeah. I'll just reference something, focusing more on Taylor specifically. You're so different, he said. You're standing straighter, dressing like you aren't trying to hide in your clothes, moving with more purpose. I think you've grown too. So many people, they seem like they've been burdened by what's going on. They've given up a little, lost important things. That just makes the contrast between you and them that much stronger. I turned around. Was I? I don't feel that much stronger. And then later she says, I'm not saying there isn't a change. There probably is. I don't know if I'm better because of it.
Yeah, I love this because there's never any easy answers in this story, right? Because Taylor has gotten stronger. Taylor is more confident. She's less of the worm that Cherish saw her as. She's more self-assured, and she is generally living a better life and trying to be her best self. But what is the cost of this? And you can almost see the cost in the description here, that she's standing up straighter. Everyone else has given up and lost important things. That the contrast between the two of them, as Taylor has risen, seemingly the rest of the world has descended.
Yeah. And we're about to see a perfect example of that kind of lens on Taylor from the outside, because she sees a Know Where You Are pamphlet sitting on the table.
Yeah, and I think we're just going to pick a little important snapshot of the pamphlet on Skitter's territory that I just love.
Yeah. So it just reads, Skitter is an unpredictable young woman tending toward acts of apparent kindness to those she deems her subjects and bursts of sudden and extreme violence toward those she sees as her enemies.
Kind of sounds like you and I wrote this pamphlet, huh, Matt?
Yeah. I love these pamphlets.
Yeah, they're so great.
Somebody actually made like a GIF of one of these. And
awesome. Really? That's cool.
Yeah. So again, for the rest of this conversation, Taylor is fluidly lying to her dad about almost everything about herself, basically.
Yeah. And this is the point, I think, when you begin to question, why is she here? Because she doesn't seem particularly interested in his well-being. She's not really here to help him or apologize to him for what she put him through. She just felt guilty because for a brief moment, she was reminded of a bond between father and son or father and daughter. And she just had to head here to make herself feel better, I guess. And really the only good thing that comes out of this is her dad forces her to commit to seeing him again in a couple days, to go to the election of the town hall. Part of me doubts that she'll actually keep this appointment, but it feels like set up for something, so I say she's going to. But that's really the only net positive that comes out of this entire thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So at this point, Tattletale calls and interrupts them, which is totally a pattern, by the way.
Yeah, you're right.
And she relates her interaction with Coil, where her power is now giving her a completely different read and suggesting that he doesn't plan on killing Skitter and never did. And then he implicitly threatens her and explicitly warns her that her power isn't as reliable as she thinks it is.
Yeah, so basically they're ace in the hole with this whole plan of theirs. Tattletale's power is suddenly completely unreliable. Coil has found a way to beat it or get around it. Perhaps he uses his multiple universes as like a way to confuse how she speculates. Like he thinks something really hard in one universe and then gets her to speculate on that and then kills it after. I don't know. Something like that would be cool. But either way, you got to wonder at this point what hope Taylor has now of freeing Dinah. Coil knows what they're doing and knows how to beat them. And he'll continue using them. Of course, he's going to do that. He'll use them until he doesn't need to. and then he'll cut them off, and they won't even be able to sense it coming. I'm sure glad she almost stung a teenager to death for all this.
Yeah, that was totally a worthwhile trade against someone who can decide outcomes as he describes his power. So she goes back in with her dad, and she thinks about souls, and that if she has one, it's full of holes, and she discovers more holes even as she tries to patch up the one she found.
And I think this is a real moment of genuine self-reflection and realization in her. And I wish I could be more positive of this and say that she's going to learn from this and change her ways, but I just don't buy it. I just think she's going to store this away and forget it again until the next time she's feeling low because of her decisions. And then she's going to pull it out again and feel sorry for herself. And look, I've been trying to find a way to make myself better. I'm damaged. I don't know what to do. And then she's going to put that away when it's inconvenient for her to do. And it's just, I am so frustrated with her right now. I think it's all very intentional. I think the writing is fantastic. Where you're supposed to be really frustrated with Taylor at this point. It's fantastic, but God, I'm so mad at her.
Yeah, I mean, she's let herself down, basically. That's where the emotion is coming from, I think. This was not something that she ever wanted to happen, but she made it happen, and she has her justifications, but like she can't even look at those justifications with a straight face anymore, and it's things are kind of really kind of piling up on her.
Yeah, and I like I said, I hope this breeds change, but I just have so many doubts now that because I think we've been here before. We've been in moments where I've thought that this is going to be a moment of real realization for Taylor, and it doesn't seem to work out. It just doesn't seem to stick with her. Yeah.
So we have this moment. I nodded and turned to leave. I wasn't half a block away from the house before I felt the tears welling up, running down my face. I couldn't say whether they were because of my love for my dad or my despair for Dinah.
And this might just be my frustration talking, but I can say which one they are, Taylor, because you don't give a shit about your dad.
So mean, Scott. So mean to Taylor.
I'm sorry. I'm so mad at her.
I understand. Okay, so we move into 15 dot whatever, the Rory interlude. And this is the final chapter, I believe. So Prism arrives at Rory, aka Triumph's hospital bed, and we learn a little bit about both of them. They both only had a few dates because Prism does not live here, and she's indeed scheduled back to go to New York today.
Yeah, there's something just so refreshingly quaint and lovely about their back and forth dialogue here. There's no ulterior motive. There's no doublespeak. It's just a couple of teenagers who genuinely seem to like each other, joking back and forth. And I think, like has been said many, many times before, both on this podcast and without, it really is a welcome reprieve from being inside Taylor's head, especially after the emotional gut punch of the last couple chapters. Like, just being able to laugh at some quick flowing, fun dialogue was such a welcome moment for me.
Yeah, that's totally one of my favorite things, is this ability to release the tension, release the intensity.
Yeah.
So they decide they're going to go for coffee, but Ursa Aurora intercepts them, telling them that there's an urgent department business to attend to.
Yeah, and here's the giant bear to ruin all our less serious fun.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, so we learn a little bit more about Prism in the elevator. Being injured puts her in a dark place because it reminds her of an old rift in her family, where she tore her ACL doing gymnastics, and then she stopped being able to live up to her dad's expectations for her as an athlete. And presumably this is what precipitated her trigger.
Oh, you mean the trigger that gave her powers for three of her to exist simultaneously? Like her father put so much pressure on her, she wished there could be three of her to meet all expectations? Or something? Something like that?
Yay for family. For his part, Rory couldn't cut it as a baseball player, so his rich dad provided him with a little vial.
Family. So many cauldron capes. Like, we keep more and more cauldron capes, and I think this serves as a constant reminder of the level of their influence on the world. We seem in every organization to find more and more the more we learn about these guys.
Yeah, and I think we shouldn't be surprised to find them in the Protectorate, because we know
they are the Protectorate.
Well, I was just going to say, because the bias of natural triggers is to be villains, actually.
Right. Yeah.
And if Cauldron statistically does make more heroes, I mean, that's just an assumption. I'm pretty sure that's not a spoilery sentiment. That's just based on what we know.
No, that's explicit in the text. Yeah.
Yeah. So they exit the elevator and they walk into an argument in progress in the ward's HQ. Assault is arguing in favor of going after the Undersiders for revenge for the attack on Rory's house. And Miss Militia is fronting the opposing side, basically stating that this goes against everything the Protectorate stands for. So at root, though, we see that Assault is deeply out of sorts over the death of Battery, and maybe he's channeling some of that anger into this.
So sad.
I know, it's heartbreaking. It's his name.
I do wish in this moment that the Assault and Battery romance was just done a little bit better. I think this would make this moment land a lot more. Maybe if we got more time with it, maybe if Assault didn't come off as kind of creepy at first, this would have worked better. But I mean, it works fine on its own, but you just can't help but think maybe it could have been just a little bit better.
Yeah, well, I mean, on the one hand, he is kind of a bad guy. Like he was a guy who was a mercenary who broke people out of, broke potentially really bad people out of jail, and now he's kind of lost what was anchoring him to the Protectorate. So his mentality is like pretty bloody minded in the first place.
Yeah,
I guess
I get that, and I understand that. I just think if we had established that anchor a little bit better, then that would have landed just a little bit more.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. So out of everyone else, Vista is surprisingly in the take them out camp. And her reasoning is she's tired of losing people, and she sees the Undersiders as being a part of that problem. Unfortunately, it seems that the Protectorate and the wards view the Undersiders as being culpable in some sense for a lot of the losses that they've suffered. In some cases, I guess it's fair, but in others, it's unfair but understandable.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see what your thoughts on this argument as a whole are. Because on one hand, the Undersiders are criminals, and the Protectorate's job is to take out criminals. But like they said, a key tenet of this arrangement is that they only do this at the consent of the governing body. And now, of course, we know that the governing body is a corrupt system in which the actual controlling interests have plans outside of the body itself, but that's not, they just because, like, we know that they don't, and they don't get to act unilaterally. They don't get to decide who to take out and when. They as a rule have to follow orders. And to Miss Militia's point, it's those orders that separate them from the vigilantes roaming the street, from the villains. To break from those orders and to take revenge, it might solve the problem, but it would forsake everything that they stand for. I'm Team Miss Militia in this moment. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I think there's even what's the word? Comparable situations in real life where cops kind of know that a certain area is controlled by the criminal element, but there's an understanding between the cops and those people that certain activities won't happen. Maybe this was more of a thing in the past when like the mob was bigger. I don't know. At least this is what movies have led me to believe. Okay. But anyway, like it makes sense. It makes a certain amount of sense, especially when you're resource constrained, which they obviously are. And if they escalate this to open warfare with what they don't really realize, but what is actually like all of Coil's, minions, then things would get really bad for the city, actually.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're in a bad spot. Like the Protectorate is undeniably in a bad spot. So yeah. So anyway, Assault suggests specifically attacking Skitter or Hellhound because, a variety of reasons, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, and the most shocking part of all this to me was how Miss Militia admits that in a flat-out fight, the Protectorate would lose. She says they'd retaliate, Miss Militia said, and we'd almost certainly lose. We're roughly matched in numbers, we're outmatched in raw firepower, and they have the edge on us in terms of tactical knowledge. And that's like a really like big realization moment when you realize that this gang of kids has now gotten to a point where the combined power between all of them is enough to handle the reigning authority agency of the city. That they could easily dispatch them, or not, maybe not easily, but they have the advantage in literally every single element that Miss Militia just read off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I that definitely stood out to me also as being like, whoa, things have really shifted now. So yeah, ultimately, Triumph, who's our POV at this point, he hasn't really spoken much, but he comes down on Miss Militia's side, even though he was the one who was attacked, and I guess that counts for a lot. So it kind of seems like the argument is going to wind down, but just in time, Pigot shows up with some folks. Dragon has arrived in her new replicant form, looking like a very average person, with Defiant.
Yeah, I love the details on how average-looking Dragon is. Triumph almost goes up to the line to say, so average that it was almost as if she was designed to look as average as possible, which right, of course right. we know is true. But Triumph does note there's a beat in here where he says there's something familiar about her face. And I don't know if I'm supposed to know yet what that means or not, but that definitely jumped out at me. I love that everyone knows Defiant is Colin immediately. Like, for half a second I thought the book was gonna like go on pretending like everyone didn't know who this guy was, and that was about to be like, oh my god, this is gonna be the easiest win in speculations ever, because this is most obviously Armsmaster, but luckily it didn't do that. Yeah, so Dragon and Defiant are going to go after the 9. Dragon doesn't need sleep. Colin now barely needs sleep at all after carving out most of his body and modifying his brain. And Shatterbird is out of the picture, and she had previously been kind of the biggest impediment to Dragon. So they think they can make more progress than other teams have made in the past. Yeah, I can't help but notice how Colin has now done to himself a very similar thing that Mannequin did to himself. Remove as much of his humanity as possible, and kind of turn himself into a monster. But it's for the greater good, right? So it's fine.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's something that you could mine quite deeply. This idea that he essentially passed Mannequin's test.
Yep.
You know, I mean, that was he's doing it for his own reasons, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, this is a fascinating character. So yeah, Dragon introduces to them her 7 new mobile suits, which all have completely badass names, and Dragon can now use all of them at once, quote, because of Defiant's help.
Yep, so there's our indication that Colin cracked whatever limitations were in place on Dragon to ensure that only one instance of her existed at the time. I still don't completely trust Dragon, you guys. I know you all got mad at me last time. Hunting the 9 is great. That's good. But these two could be really dangerous if they decide to turn their target somewhere else.
Yeah, I don't know why you'd be worried about the guy who was arrested for breaking the Endbringer truce and the paranoid AI working together, Scott. I mean, that's completely unreasonable.
You're going to get people to yell at us, Matt.
Oh, well. Yeah, so it's funny because everyone is like studiously acting normal around Defiant, but Triumph can't take it any longer, and he points out that Defiant is obviously Armsmaster without actually saying those words, and Pigot pretty much shuts him down and is just like, oh, so you want to deprive us of these armored suits and this powerful cape who's trying to help fight the 9, and all the other capes are obviously super eager to ignore it, though they're not enthusiastic about it. They're just kind of finding their shoes really interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting and very intentional that moments before we were all having an argument about how important it is to follow the rules, to follow the system that society has set up for us, and to follow that tightly. And when you go on just breaking rules, even if they're for the greater good, that leads to problems. And then suddenly we're presented this where the director of the PRT is telling them basically to do exactly this, to look the other way, to ignore Armsmaster as a criminal, so we can use his efficiency in hunting down bad people. And it's like we just had this whole argument about how we have to follow the rules, we have to do as ordered, and then again we're just ignoring the law for our own benefit.
Yeah, and you can see why can see why the protector capes are struggling with lots of things, actually, because I mean, Skitter was just talking about the corruption to Flechette about all that, and Pigot right here is embodying that, I think.
Yep. And I love that in that moment, Triumph calls up the difference when he says there's a difference between serving the system and enabling it. And he fully recognized that in doing this, they are enabling this. They are allowing this to happen. This unquestionably wrong thing. This guy who has done wrong, who has committed crimes, who has broken one of the most sacred truces of this world. Like, out of all the chaos and destruction, the only thing that is like actually held together is the Endbringer truce. He broke it, but we're looking the other way.
Yeah. So at the end of this, Triumph is disappointed that Prism didn't speak up. So he cancels their coffee plans and bids her farewell.
Yeah, cape relationships do not work is the alternate aim for this arc.
Yep. I mean, that's literally the conclusion of the arc.
Yeah.
So yeah, part of Triumph's problem here as he's going for a little walk is just how much he relates to Armsmaster and understands his decisions. He gets it. He's somebody who would have used purchased superpowers to cheat at baseball if he could have gotten away with it. So he finds it easy to put himself in Armsmaster's position, and that's disturbing to him, I suppose.
Yeah, but he still lets Armsmaster get away with it. And he even acknowledges that by doing that, he just became a little bit more like him. And I love this, the way this arc ends. Triumph goes out into the wreckage of the city, sits in the wastelands of Brockton Bay in the crater created by the bombs that Pigot dropped, and looks at the two dead monsters, literal monsters, in Crawler and Mannequin, and sits there staring at them, trying to find, is there a way that I can tell the monsters from the men? And it says maybe it was to find some clue, some sign he could watch out for that would let him identify the monsters from the men. And it's this beautiful moment where he sits there, and it even establishes that he can't sit there for more than 5 minutes because it might be dangerous because radiation. But he stays there for 15 because he's just desperate to try to find something in this world that allows him to separate between the good people and the bad. And he just can't find it because it's not there. Like, you can't. There's not black and white. Like, it's all this mess of gray, and poor Triumph is in the middle of that, unsure of what to do.
Yeah, and you could apply this question over and over and over again, really. I mean, you can say, when you look at Panacea, when you look at Alexandria, when you look at Taylor herself, like, what is it that you're supposed to see that separates, a monster from, in this case, a woman, or from a hero, for that matter?
Yeah.
You look at Alexandria, you can make a case 3 different ways, I imagine. It's
yep. Yeah.
It's fantastic.
It is. It absolutely is. And I think that's like, we go through all this Taylor stuff, and Taylor is frustrating us and disappointing us and making me mad. And then we get to this Triumph thing, and it's almost like soothing to me in a weird kind of way, because it just kind of calms me down and levels me and helps realize, like, yes, Taylor is screwing up, but this is so hard. Like, it's so hard to try to operate in this world when these are your choices, when these are the situations that you're presented with. And yeah, I get mad at Taylor. I think it's deserved. I think she did a lot of shitty stuff in this arc, but it's not easy to live in this world, and it's a lot to put on a person. And I don't know if anyone would be capable of making good decisions when these are your choices. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. All right, Scott. Well, that wraps up our beat-by-beat discussion of Arc 15 in toto. So let's move on to those speculations, those juicy speculations that everyone's looking forward to.
All right. As far as old ones being proven, there's none again. We got confirmation officially in the Triumph arc that Sophia is no longer a member of the Wards. But my speculation said she would not be a Ward, but would play a part in the story in the future, and we haven't seen the second half of that quite yet, so we can't conclude on that definitively yet. So we'll say half true at this point. I do still think she's going to come back in some way. I think there's still stuff to do with her.
Okay.
So my new one, the one that everyone's been waiting for since I teased it, both on Twitter 2 weeks ago. It's funny, I'm saying 2 weeks ago, but I'm time traveling, so it was really today that I tweeted this, but you guys have been waiting for it. Here's what I think, and here's my rationalization. So my guess now is that the Travelers as a whole are all Cauldron Capes. I had to guess that Genesis was one because of Genesis's power being so close to Siberians, but now I'm going to say all of them were. And I'm going to say that Noelle's situation is the result of her particular vial going wrong in some horrible, terrible, terrifying kind of way. And Trickster was the one who suggested to everyone that they get the vials and take the vials. And that's why everyone blames him, because it was his fault. He was the one that forced them or pressured them or guided them into this decision. And look what happened. Again, I still don't know how that ties into the that was only half of our problems part. But I also don't think this directly contradicts what I said last week about their home being destroyed by an Embringer and them being forced on the run. I think that it slides nicely into it, but I'm still not sure on that one. But this one, I'm feeling pretty good on, so.
Cool. All right, Scott, that's great. That wraps up our coverage of Arc 15 Colony. I hope everyone enjoyed our discussion and hearing Scott's reactions. As always, we appreciate your feedback, and we're always trying to improve, so let us know if you have any advice, questions, or thoughts on this week's episode.
Yeah, you can reach out to us via email at gotwormpod@gmail.com or on Twitter at gotwormpod. My personal Twitter is at scottdaly85, that's DALY, and Matt's is at
It's just more in email, guys.
It's in the show notes.
Yeah. If you're not already subscribed to We've Got Worm, we strongly recommend you do so and never miss an episode. You can find us on Stitcher, iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, and pretty much anywhere else in the world that you can listen to podcasts.
And as always, you can find this, all the other podcasts we do, and all of our writing, essays, film and TV criticism, and more at dailyplanetfilms.com. I'm going on vacation, but when I come back, I am recommitting myself to write more about film. I've missed doing it. I haven't been prioritizing it in my life, and I'm going to start doing it. So you'll be hopefully seeing a bunch of essays in a few weeks.
Awesome. I look forward to it. We also have a Patreon page, patreon.com/dailyplanetfilms. If you like what we do here and you want to make sure we keep doing more of it and you want to read those movie articles that Scott's talking about, consider donating $1 a month or whatever else you can afford. Remember that this episode was recorded well in advance. So if you've become a patron in the last week or so, we will hit you up when Scott returns from his vacation.
Yeah, because this 2 weeks in advance, it's crazy. Like the world could be at war by the time you're listening to this episode, and we wouldn't know it.
Right. We recorded this on July 5th, just for reference. So.
And the world ended on July 7th.
Yep, I know, and no one got to listen to the episode. So.
Oh, damn it. I forgot about that part. Shit. I hope the world doesn't end.
But anyway, before the world ends, and if you happen to be on Patreon, make sure you stop by Wildbow's page and toss some money there, because he's the guy who makes this whole thing possible.
And as always, if you are one of those that can't spare any extra cash, we do completely understand, but there are tons of ways to still help us out. As you're listening to this, I am currently in Norway, and I'm telling everyone I see about Worm and our podcast. It's a bit of a problem because I don't speak Norwegian at all, but details. If you listen on iTunes, you could also take a quick moment and rate and review our podcast. That would really help us out. This week's review is from Sammy, who, full disclosure, I know in real life. He's one of my friends. So this feels like a bit of cheating, but we make the rules, and I say it's fine. Sammy gives us 5 stars. You fucking better give us 5 stars, Sammy. And says, "This is my first time reading Worm, and I am reading alongside Matt and Scott. First off, the story is amazing, and having 2 people who spend so much time breaking things down makes the experience so much better. I can't wait for Worm Wednesday every week." He said first off, but didn't have a second off. That's not Sammy. You edit your review.
Well, thanks very much, Sammy. I appreciate your review.
I do too. I'm just kidding. I'm just giving a hard time. Sammy's a great guy. Thanks, Sammy. And I'll make sure to give you your $20 for doing that next time I see you.
Yeah. Yeah, and so thanks to everyone who has taken the time to rate and review us. That's it for this week. A quick reminder for all the artists out there that there are still 2 weeks left to submit your artwork for our patron-supported fan art contest. Click the link in the show notes for more details. Next week, we're going to start up on Arc 16 Monarch. At over 90,000 words, this is by far the longest arc we've tackled yet. So be ready for 2 very long episodes. The first one will cover 16.1 through 16.y, the second interlude of the arc. Scott, any speculations on what the arc title means this time?
Well, Matt, my guess is that we'll be battling over who will be crowned king or queen of Brockton Bay as the mayoral election, Coyle's plan, and the Undersiders' plot to dethrone him all come to a head. That's my guess, at least.
All right. Well, we'll see you next Wednesday on another exciting episode of We've Got Worm.